My name is Vera Mitchell. I'm 67, a widowed bookkeeper who still keeps other people's numbers straight because it helps me keep my own memories from unraveling. I live in a small house with a lavender hedge and a front stoop that creaks like an old violin. On the morning this story begins, I was sweeping leaves off that stoop when the black SUV slid against the curb like a bad idea deciding to happen. 2 doors slammed, 3 suitcases kissed the concrete. The camera by my door blinked its red dot, polite and patient. I set the broom aside. My hand found the deadbolt by habit, not fear. At least that's what I told myself. Clara stood there with mascara cooling into 2 thin rivers, and behind her, Damon wore his grin like a badge he'd pinned on himself. "Mom," my daughter said, voice small and rehearsed, "I sold the villa." I looked at her the way you look at a wave that's already broken. There's no stopping it, only bracing. "Which villa, Clara?" "The beachfront." "1 million, she said, the words in a rush, as if speed could turn them into mercy. "And I gave it all to Damon so he could, get things moving." "Moving where?" I asked, though the suitcases answered for her. Damon stepped closer, the cologne arriving before the apology that never came. "We'll be staying here for a while," he said, "just till it stabilizes." "No," I said, not loud, not angry, just a line drawn in wood. "Never." His eyes narrowed, the kind of glare people practice in mirrors. My door camera caught it, a flash of metal in his stare, as if spite could rust through hinges. Clara flinched, but she didn't step between us. This is how it reads on a thumbnail, I thought, absurdly calm. My daughter sold her $1 million beachfront villa and gave all the money to my son-in-law to squander. Then they demanded to live in my home. I said, "Never." My son-in-law shot me an angry glare. That same evening, I called my lawyer. When the subpoena arrived, he lost control. But thumbnails don't tell you how the air smells like wet iron when the future turns on its heel. Thumbnails don't show your neighbor's eyes peeking through lace curtains. One gray blur to the left, one to the right. They don't show a mother counting heartbeats so she won't count regrets. "Clara," I said, eyes on my daughter, "is that true? You sold it and transferred every dollar." She nodded once, quick and ashamed, the way a child nods when the floor is already gone beneath her. Damon lifted one suitcase as if I'd asked for proof. "It's better for everyone," he said, smiling with his teeth, not his face. "We cut costs. We pool resources. Family is leverage." "Family is love," I said. "Leverage belongs in banks." "And banks belong to people who move," he said smoothly. We moved. I laid my palm flat on the door as though I were calming a skittish animal. The camera blinked again. Little red. Dot watching, little red dot remembering. "You may not come in," I said. He laughed, low and scratchy. "You'll call the police on your own daughter." "I'll call the law on the man who thinks I don't know it," I answered. His glare sharpened. Somewhere inside my chest, an old bell stopped ringing. I turned the deadbolt steady and slow, the same motion I'd used the winter after my husband died, when wind shoved the porch, and I learned what it means to live with only your name written on the mortgage. "Mom, please," Clara whispered, palms open, fingers pleading. Behind her, Damon's hand gripped her shoulder, a reminder, a leash disguised as comfort. I watched that hand, and I saw every night I hadn't been invited to dinner, every holiday scheduled for a different day, every "it's complicated" text that arrived like a folded apology. I saw how control can look like guidance until you read the fine print. "You can wait in the car," I told them, "or you can leave." I did not say, "or you can grow up," because that part isn't something a mother can assign like homework. Damon's voice went flat. "You can't be serious." "I'm old," I said, "not unserious." The wind cracked the lavender stems and carried their clean, stubborn scent up to the stoop. The camera blinked. A curtain trembled across the street. My heart steadied, slow and real. "Go," I said, and closed the door. The broom lay where I'd left it, diagonal like a drawn sword. That evening, I boiled water for tea and dialed a number I'd kept for years, the way some people keep a fire extinguisher. "Harold," I said when the line clicked alive, "I'm ready to use the paper you made me sign when generosity tried to dress up as wisdom." "You still have the note?" he asked. "In the drawer with the church programs and my wedding ring," I said. 55,000, 5%, recorded with a deed of trust. He exhaled the way doctors do when a patient brings their own oxygen. "Good. Tomorrow we'll file. And Vera?" "Yes. Don't open the door." "I won't," I said, and meant 1,000 other doors too. When the subpoena arrived 3 days later, civil for breach, with copies for anyone who thought family and contract were synonyms, Damon ripped the envelope in my yard, paper flying like gulls at low tide. His face found a red I hadn't seen before. He swung his arm as if rage could knock sense into a legal document. It did not. The camera watched. The neighbors watched. I watched. Not from behind a curtain, but from my kitchen window with the latch turned and the kettle whispering to itself. He held up one stray page and shouted, "You think this can stop me?" "I think this can start you," I said softly, though he couldn't hear me. "On a road with signs." Clara stood by the SUV with her hands folded under her chin, not praying exactly, but close. She looked like someone who had borrowed a story and couldn't keep up with the interest. I wanted to lift her face and press it to my shoulder the way I did when she was 3, and storms told our windows all the wrong fairy tales. But love is not a locksmith. Sometimes, love is a line. Damon slammed the SUV door and peeled away. A scrap of white fluttered until it skidded into my lavender. I stepped outside, picked the paper up, and read the heading. Blue Harbor Capital, Intake Confirmation. The ink smelled like a promise that hadn't met a calendar yet. The camera blinked again. Blink, blink. Faithful as pulse. If you're still with me, I'll tell you the rest. But first, if any of this sounds too familiar, let me know where you're listening from. Stories travel further when they find street names. And if you think someone you love might need this, pass it along. Not for the drama, but for the map. Now, come inside with me. The kettle's ready, and so am I. I am Vera Mitchell, 67, a widowed bookkeeper who keeps other people's numbers straight so my own memories don't wander. I live on the quiet edge of a working suburb. My house is a single story with settling bones and a porch that greets me by name. At dawn, I sweep the stoop, set the kettle, and listen for small sounds that say the world still holds. The hinge that sighs, sparrows stitching their brief arguments, the hallway clock clicking like a patient heart. People say widows learn absence like a second language. If that is true, mine has only a few words. Wait, Carrie, continue. Everett, my husband, left plaid shirts folded like interrupted sentences and a toolbox with jars of screws labeled in careful handwriting. He also left a way of living I try to honor. Show up, keep records, pay what you owe, say thank you before you sit down. I've kept books for the same dental practice since 27. Debits, credits, reconciliations, small math that adds up to trust. Clara is our only child. She arrived thin and fierce and grew into a woman who remembered birthdays, rescued dogs, and laughed with her whole face. When Everett began to fail, she ferried groceries and jokes, and I watched kindness choose her like a vocation. That is what Damon praised the first time he stood on my porch with a bouquet that smelled like a search engine. He filled the doorway without crossing it, all teeth and timing, charm that photographs well from a distance. I recognize pleasant stories when they are being sold. Bookkeeping trains you to notice when the smile on the surface is financed by something you haven't seen. Damon's smile arrived with interest. He wore a watch that announced him across a room and spoke in slogans that traveled well. Build equity, seize momentum, go big or regret it. Clara heard possibility, wind in her ribs. I heard velocity without a map. Still, I wanted her joy more than I wanted to be right. They married by the lake on a bright, windy Saturday. When the beachfront villa, appeared like a postcard with their names. I gave them my blessing and $55,000 for the down payment. I documented it as a loan because Harold, my lawyer, insisted, and because love and paperwork can be partners, not enemies. Lavender runs the length of my front fence. It is plain in generous light, stubborn in bad weather, brave in every season. People think it is delicate because it smells gentle. They are wrong. It survives blunt shears and distracted gardeners and returns with something to say. When I kneel to weed, oil opens under my gloves, and sorrow minds its manners. If a flower can be a philosophy, this one is mine. Be soft, but rooted. Bend, but not the way a lie bends you. Before the morning with the SUV, my life had settled into rituals I could lift without straining. On the refrigerator, a list in black pen. Finish quarterlies, call the pharmacy, replace smoke alarm batteries, prune winter wood. On Thursdays, I brought coffee to the crossing guard whose hands shake in January. On Saturdays, I sorted buttons at the church thrift store with Mrs. Whitaker and listened to stories travel from bin to bin. I had made peace with smallness. I chose it. Choosing is how small becomes shelter instead of cage. Most mornings, I carry a chipped mug onto the porch and watch the lavender shoulder the breeze. The neighborhood wakes in polite increments, a screen door, a bicycle chain, Mrs. Whitaker's terrier declaring jurisdiction. Warmth lives in these small rehearsals. They remind me I am held by ordinary things, not by promises too loud to keep. And that warmth used to be enough then. Clara called from airports and kitchens, and once laughing from the villa balcony, while the ocean practiced forever. At first she sounded like herself, windswept, certain, building a life that included neighbors and books. Over months her sentences changed shape. We wanted this, we decided that. Plans I recognized thinned and were replaced with Damon's weather reports, a meeting, an opportunity, a timing window you could miss. Dinners slid across the calendar. Holidays moved to accommodate a pitch, a trip, a man too busy to be late. She apologized as if love were a spreadsheet to correct next quarter. Damon came to family dinners like a limited-time offer. He tipped loudly, returned items without receipts, and narrated generosity as if it were a binding agreement. I folded my concerns like towels, clean, stacked, waiting beside the linen closet of my patients. When you love an adult, you leave the door unlatched and pray the wind knows which way to blow. You may ask why I did not raise my voice sooner. Parents carry hope the way bricklayers carry mortar, between every stone. I believed Clara's tenderness could season a life the way lavender seasons air, subtle, everywhere, convincing even rooms that have forgotten how to breathe. I believed patience could be a tool, not a leash. I believed, for a time, that Damon's ambition might one day draw a map. Hope is not foolish by itself, but it must be reconciled like any account, and I had not done my closing. The morning it changed, the sky wore undecided gray, and the street kept its promise of quiet. I set the kettle, swept the stoop, and pinched a tired bloom from the lavender. The security camera above my door blinked awake with a soft chime. A low engine pressed into the air. Before the black SUV turned toward my curb, Cologne reached the porch like an early argument. I stood and faced the gate. Between the street and me, the lavender held its thin purple line, everything soft that refuses to surrender. In that breath, I was not frightened. I was finished. There is a difference. They followed me into the house like wind that hadn't been invited. Too fast, too loud. Damon walked in like he owned the deed. Clara trailed behind like a shadow, unsure of the light. He didn't ask before opening the fridge. His cologne clung to the chilled air as he pulled out my pitcher of brewed tea, poured himself a glass, and drank without a word. I said nothing. I'd learned years ago that some silences hold more power than the sharpest sentence. Clara perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands folded in her lap like they were waiting for permission to speak. I stood by the doorway, didn't sit, didn't offer tea. I looked at them like you look at numbers that won't reconcile. I'm going to ask once, I said, my voice even. Where's the $1 million? Clara's shoulders twitched. Her gaze darted to Damon, then back to the floor. It's not gone, she whispered, like a child describing a broken heirloom. Then where is it? I asked again, softer now, not for comfort, just precision. She cleared her throat. We moved it into Blue Harbor Capital. It's a growth fund. Damon's friend runs it. It's a solid investment, Mom. Damon set his glass down hard enough to echo. It's a venture pool, fast returns, coastal properties. You wouldn't understand the mechanics. I nodded slowly, as if their words were foreign but not unfamiliar. Clara, I said, when you bought the villa, who gave you the down payment? She blinked. You did. How much? $55,000, she said, eyes closing after the number like she hoped it would disappear behind her lids. And what did we write down? I asked. Silence. I had Harold draw up a simple note, I continued. No interest if repaid in 5 years, 5% if not, a signed document notarized. You remember that? Clara bit her lip. You said it was just in case. It was, I said, and now just in case has arrived. Damon chuckled without humor. You're seriously bringing up a family I owe you. From how many years ago? What are you gonna do? Sue your daughter? I met his smirk with the steadiness of someone who's buried both a husband and the illusion that silence solves everything. It's not an IOU. It's a contract. I never gave you that money as a gift. It came from your father's retirement annuity. You were buying the dream house. I wanted to help, but I also wanted to be wise. Damon leaned forward, his elbows on his knees like he was coaching a child out of a tantrum. This is family, Vera. Not court. Nobody actually goes after their daughter over paper. You'd be surprised what mothers do when they've been quiet too long. He didn't laugh this time. Clara stared at the rug like it held her answers. Damon looked around the room with the calculating gaze of someone scanning value. His eyes paused on the cabinet where I kept china, the shelves with my father's war medals, the framed photo of Clara at graduation. Then, with an air of condescension only wealthless men can master, he said, You're being emotional. That paper means nothing. I walked to the kitchen. The teapot had begun to hum. I poured hot water over a bag of chamomile, watched steam bloom in the air like breath from something waking. You think I'm being emotional, I said, returning with the cup, hands steady though my knuckles ached. But I'm being precise. Like I've always been. The tea's surface shimmered. I set the cup down in front of me. My fingers trembled slightly. Age, or anger, or maybe the accumulation of too many seasons where I was only heard when soft, but my eyes didn't tremble. They met Damon's and did not blink. You used Clara's trust. She sold her only security for your scheme. And now you want to live under my roof, eat from my fridge, and pretend we're a village? We're not. You broke the bridge, Damon. You don't get to picnic on the ashes. Clara whispered, He's trying, Mom. He really believes in this, and I believed in you, I said, voice low but firm. That doesn't mean I signed up for silence. He leaned back, arms spread, a smirk forming again. So, what now? You throw us out? Write a letter to a lawyer? Frame that old debt on your wall? I picked up the tea, took a sip. It burned just enough to remind me I was very much alive. Then I said quietly, The letter's already written. His smirk cracked. I never let the ink dry on that loan, I continued, because I knew, someday, you'd mistake my kindness for forgetfulness. His tone sharpened. You'd really go through with that? Drag Clara into court over some technicality? No, I said, and placed the cup gently back on its saucer. I'll bring you into court. She can come as a witness or a plaintiff. Outside, the lavender bushes swayed, brushing against the window. The wind carried their scent into the room, clean, calm, enduring. "You think you're strong?" Damon said, jaw tight. "You think a piece of paper protects you?" "No," I replied, eyes still locked on his. "I think it reminds me who I used to be. And who I don't have to be anymore." He didn't answer. For once, even he was still. The kettle let out one last sigh behind me. Clara's lip quivered, but she didn't cry. She just sat there, caught between the man she followed and the woman who once held her every night when she had nightmares. I watched her, not with pity, but with pain. The kind you carry quietly like folded linen behind glass. And then I said, to neither of them, but also to both, "You've forgotten what it means to plant something and wait." But I haven't. My roots are still here, and I'm done pretending you're the storm I have to survive. I turned, walked back to the kitchen, and closed the drawer where the loan paper slept. Not a relic, not a threat, just truth. Finally awake. I hadn't finished my tea when I heard the low drag of wheels scraping against concrete. I stepped toward the front door and opened it, just as Damon lifted the last of 2 heavy black suitcases onto my porch. His other hand gripped a duffel. Behind him, Clara stood with red eyes and a loose grip on her purse strap. Her face was pale in the porch light. "We're staying," he said flatly. He didn't ask. He didn't even pretend. "No," I said, standing firm in the doorway. Damon's tone sharpened. "Clara's exhausted. We've been driving since morning. We're not going to sleep in a hotel like fugitives." I pointed to the driveway. "Then you shouldn't have burned your bridge." He stepped forward, dragging the larger suitcase with him. The wheels thudded against the wooden step. I stepped out fully now, blocking his path. Clara looked at me, eyes pleading. "Please, Mom. Just for a few nights. We'll sort things out." But Damon didn't wait. He reached for the doorknob behind me. Without another word, I reached inside the doorframe and pressed the speaker button on my security panel. The outdoor camera clicked on. A soft chime echoed into the night, then a mechanical voice. "Recording in progress." The words echoed across the porch. Then I turned up the volume, loud enough that the sound spilled into the street. Across the road, I saw Mrs. Delaney's curtain shift slightly. Her porch light flickered on. "Vera," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. Damon's face flushed red. His smile was gone, replaced by clenched teeth. His arm reached back, tightening around Clara's shoulder, not in comfort, but possession. His fingers gripped her so tightly she winced. "She's my wife," he growled. "We have nowhere else tonight." "What kind of mother?" I cut him off. "There's time," I said, voice low but resolute. "But there are also boundaries. This is my home, not yours." He sneered. "What are you going to do? Call the police?" "Over your own daughter?" I didn't answer. Instead, I stepped forward, placing my body squarely between him and the doorway. "Take your things," I said quietly, "and go." He didn't move, but his eyes darted to the red glow of the security camera. He knew what it meant. It meant the neighbors were listening. It meant everything he said, everything he did was no longer just between us. Clara reached for his arm, tugging gently. "Please," she whispered, "just go." "Not tonight." He yanked his arm back, furious, humiliated. "You don't get to decide." But he didn't step closer. Instead, he stood there, fists clenched, eyes burning into mine. Then he picked up the duffel, threw it back into the trunk with a violent swing, and stormed off the porch without another word. Clara followed, hesitating at the top of the steps. "Mom," she said softly, "he's just scared." "He's lost everything." I didn't respond. Instead, I reached for the door, looked her straight in the eye, and said, "So have I." And I shut it. Behind me, I heard the first thud of Damon's fist against the door. Once. Twice. Then his muffled voice shouting something I didn't catch. Something ugly, no doubt. Something meant to punish me for daring to protect myself. But I didn't go back down. I climbed the stairs slowly, past the framed photos of birthdays and old Christmases, past the handprint Clara had made in kindergarten, back when love still meant glue and glitter. I reached my bedroom. Quiet, cold. I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out a small brass key. My hands still shook. Whether from fear or fury, I couldn't say. I crossed the room and unlocked the wall safe behind the bookcase. The hinges creaked faintly. Inside, beneath old tax folders and a folded American flag from my late husband's service, lay a thin, ivory envelope. I opened it. The paper was crisp, dated 8 years ago, signed, notarized, witnessed by Harold Langley, our longtime family lawyer. Promissory note. Borrower, Clara Mitchell Watts. Amount $55,000 repayment terms, 0% interest within 5 years, 5% annual thereafter, and at the bottom, my own handwriting. This is a loan from mother to daughter. A gift in spirit, but a responsibility in law. I remembered the day I wrote that. Clara had just fallen in love with the beach house. Her eyes had sparkled like ocean foam. Damon had already started making renovation plans, lavish ones. Too lavish. I'd called it a gift that day. But Harold, wise, cautious, insisted it be formalized. "You never know, Vera," he'd said. "Someday, love becomes leverage." Put it on paper. Back then, I thought it was cold. Now I know it was protection. The only real protection I had left. I held the paper gently between my palms like it was something sacred. Outside, I heard the rumble of their SUV finally pulling away. But inside, something had shifted. A mother's hope had been traded for a woman's clarity. I folded the paper back along its original lines, slid it into a new envelope, and placed it beside my nightstand. Not hidden, not locked, just present. Like a boundary redrawn. Like a promise that hadn't expired. The next morning, I drove to Harold Pierce's office. It was barely 9 a.m., but the sun had already baked the sidewalks and bleached the red bricks of the old town square. I parked beside a hydrangea bush that had long outgrown its pot and stepped into the small law firm nestled between the bakery and the antique shop. The bell above the door gave a gentle chime. Harold hadn't changed much. 82 now, with thick glasses and the same tie clip he wore at my husband's will signing. Harold still exuded a kind of old-world steadiness, like a safe that never forgot its combination. He rose slowly when I entered. "Vera," he said, voice raspy but warm, "I was just thinking about you yesterday." I gave a polite smile. "You always say that, Harold." He chuckled. "And I always mean it. Sit down." We sat across from each other, his desk a familiar chaos of files, teacups, and legal pads. I pulled the promissory note from my purse and laid it in front of him. "I need to talk about this." He adjusted his glasses and read the note, slowly and carefully, as if deciphering scripture. When he looked back up, his expression had shifted. "Has Clara defaulted?" "She sold the villa," I replied. "All of it. Gave every penny to her husband, Damon. Didn't pay a cent back." Harold's eyebrows rose. "$1 million? Gone?" "Gone," I said. "Or so he says." "Some investment firm, Blue Harbor Capital." Harold frowned deeply. "That doesn't sound familiar." "I'll run a search." He opened his laptop and typed quickly, the clicks echoing louder than necessary in the quiet room. I watched his eyes scan the screen, then his lips pursed. No SEC registration, no BBB accreditation. The domain was registered only 6 months ago, out of Belize. I felt my stomach drop. "Shell company?" He nodded slowly. "Or worse, pure fiction." I leaned back, breath shallow. My fingers gripped the edge of the chair. "She's been scammed," I whispered. "No," Harold said, steepling his fingers. "She's been married." I looked at him. He continued, more gently now. "Some men don't need to scam strangers, Vera. They just marry their targets." I said nothing. He slid the promissory note back toward me. This document is valid. Clara signed under no duress, and you've kept a clean record. If she liquidated the asset purchased in part with your loan and failed to repay, she's in breach. What about Damon? I asked. He spent the money. Spousal consent applies, especially if they commingled funds. If we can prove he benefited from the sale, and you can, he's just as liable. Possibly more. I stared at the paper. Its red notary seal caught the light like blood under glass. She's my daughter, I said. He looked at me, patient. You know, people always say that until the moment their children stop being their children and start being creditors. Or worse, enablers. I exhaled slowly. My voice came out, lower than I expected. She wasn't like this before. She used to have a spine. She still does, Harold said. It's just wrapped around his. Silence stretched between us. A ceiling fan hummed above. Outside, a dog barked once, then nothing. Harold broke the silence. I have a colleague. Retired detective. He works cases like this, quietly. Wants me to refer you? I nodded, almost involuntarily. Yes, please. He wrote a name on a yellow sticky note and handed it over. As I reached for it, I noticed the back of my hand. Thin, veined, lined with age. A hand that had once braided Clara's hair. A hand that had packed her lunch, wiped her tears, written every check, signed every field trip form, co-signed the loan that let her buy that God-forsaken villa. Now, that same hand was preparing for war. I folded the sticky note in half and placed it inside my purse. Harold stood up. Vera, I want to be clear. If you proceed, this won't just be about money. This will draw lines in the sand between you and Clara. There's no clean return from that. I stood too. There's no clean return from being used either. He gave a slow, solemn nod. I left the office with a copy of the loan documents and a new name in my bag. Back in the car, I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there staring at the courthouse across the street. For the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel confused. I didn't feel hopeful either. But I felt something cold and clarifying. Resolve. They thought I would never act, that I'd cave, just like always. But they forgot something. I'd buried a husband, I'd raised a daughter. I'd survived 2 recessions, 3 surgeries, and a stillbirth. And I was still standing. That evening, back home, I sat at my kitchen table and pulled out the folder. Legal language, witness signatures, a red seal, a debt that had stopped being about money a long time ago. I laid my hand over the page. It was time. It was just past 5 in the evening when I heard the SUV engine again. I didn't look out the window. I didn't need to. The air itself seemed to change when Damon was near. Too still, too sharp. I stayed in the kitchen, standing by the sink, hands resting on the edge of the counter, waiting. 3 knocks. Heavy. Impatient. Like a man who thought the world owed him an answer. I opened the door halfway. Damon stood on the porch with a smug grin and a manila envelope in one hand. Thought I'd bring some clarity, he said, so you don't do anything impulsive. I didn't step aside. I didn't invite him in. He opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of documents, bright-colored charts, a glossy brochure with yachts and skyscrapers, a letterhead that said Blue Harbor Capital, Wealth for the Future. He flipped to the second page. Projected returns, 18% over 12 months, diversified across emerging markets and digital assets, institutional grade. Vera, Clara and I are not stupid. Clara stood behind him, arms crossed, her eyes flickering from me to the ground and back again. You used my daughter's last penny to buy a fantasy, I said, my voice flat. And now you're here selling it to me like a cruise package. Damon shrugged. We'll all benefit in the long run. I tilted my head. We? He smiled, wider this time. Well, since it's a joint household now. Shared address, shared gains, and then he said it, like it was nothing. I used your home address as the residency for the capital gains application. Helps with taxes. And with Blue Harbor's security protocols, I froze. You did what? He held up a page. See? Mailing address. It's done all the time. Just a formality. My breath caught in my throat. You used my address, without my permission, for an offshore investment that may not even exist? Damon looked amused. You make it sound so dramatic. Clara and I are family. What's yours is... well, you know how it goes. I turned to Clara. Her eyes were wet. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Clara, I said slowly, did you know about this? She didn't answer. Did you agree to this? Still nothing. She looked down at her shoes like they were about to offer her a way out. I stepped fully onto the porch. The camera above the door clicked faintly as it recorded. I looked at Damon. You will remove my address from every record. You will not use this house as leverage for your pipe dream, and you will leave. He smirked. And if I don't? I didn't blink. Then I'll see you in court. His expression twisted. The charm evaporated. You think anyone's going to side with you over your own daughter? I didn't answer. I simply pointed to the camera. The little red light blinked like a heartbeat. He turned to Clara. Say something. She's losing it. Clara opened her mouth, closed it. Her silence roared louder than any scream. The moment held. 3 people on a porch, one filled with rage, one paralyzed by guilt, one standing firm on shaking ground. I turned to Clara again. He forged our name onto a dream that's not real. He used our house as an anchor for his lies. And you're letting him... I didn't know, she whispered. Do you believe him now? She didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. She simply stepped back. Not toward me, not toward him, just back. Damon scoffed. This is pathetic. And then, for the first time, I raised my voice, not in anger, but in something colder. You think because I've been quiet all these years, I'm blind? You think because I gave you Sunday dinners and let you call me Mom, that I forgot what a predator looks like? His eyes narrowed. I've done nothing illegal. Not yet, I said, but you've left fingerprints everywhere. He scoffed again and turned to leave. You're just bitter. And, you're just loud, I said. That doesn't make you right. As he walked away, I closed the door slowly, deliberately. Inside, the light from the hallway chandelier cast long shadows across the wooden floor. I walked up the stairs without turning them on. In my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out the small tablet where my home security synced. I rewound the footage, watched the conversation on the porch, every word, every gesture, every glare. I saved the file, labeled it Porch, Evidence 1. Below the file name, I typed a note. Violation of residency consent, recorded threats, implicit financial coercion. And then I stared at the footage one more time. This time, not as a mother, not even as a woman betrayed, but as a witness. A party to a war I never asked for, but would not run from. I looked straight into the camera as my voice, years older, steadier, sharper, cut through the silence. This isn't a family matter anymore. This is a battle. And this time, I wasn't the one being blindsided. The morning was unusually quiet. Even the birds seemed hesitant to sing, as if sensing that something was about to shift. I was standing in the kitchen, stirring honey into my tea, when I saw the black sedan pull up through the living room window. Not a neighbor's car, not a delivery. The man who stepped out wore a gray suit, briefcase in hand, and walked with the unmistakable confidence of someone who came bearing consequence. Damon was out front, watering the hedge like he owned the place. He wore those expensive loafers he always bragged about. Italian leather, stitched by hand. Funny how easily those things soak when standing in mud. The process server called his name once, calm and clear. "Mr. Damon Whitlock?" Damon barely turned. "Yeah?" The man held out the envelope. "You've been served." I watched from behind the sheer curtain as Damon took the envelope, confused for all of 2 seconds, until he saw the red seal and my name typed cleanly at the top. His entire face shifted, a slow unraveling. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. He ripped the envelope open and scanned the contents. I couldn't see the paper, but I didn't need to. I knew every word. Harold had gone over it line by line with me the day before. Violation of promissory note, civil liability for fraudulent use of address, unauthorized financial use of private property. His hand clenched around the subpoena. Then came the outburst. "You crazy old witch!" He shouted so loudly the woman across the street paused mid-step with her watering can in hand. The spray arced down onto her rose bushes in slow motion. One by one, other heads turned. Curtains shifted, garage doors stalled halfway open. A breeze kicked up and lifted the loose papers from his hand. They scattered like startled birds across the lawn. He chased them, stomping, cursing. "Unbelievable! You're suing your own damn family? You think this'll scare me? I know people." The camera above the porch recorded everything. His flailing arms, the wild twist of his mouth, the paper crumpled in his fist. And there I was, just beyond the curtain, unmoving. Clara wasn't there. For once I was glad. He kicked one of the hedge planters in a fit, sent it crashing sideways. Terracotta and soil spilled across the path I used to take to prune the lavender. I stared at it a moment too long, then turned away, slowly, deliberately. I walked to the foyer and stood behind the locked door. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I simply watched as Damon stood in the center of my front lawn, panting, red-faced, his spit flecking the edges of his words. "You think this is over? You think a piece of paper scares me?" I said nothing, but in my mind I whispered, "No, Damon, not a piece of paper, but the law, the truth. The fact that you made a mistake when you assumed silence meant surrender." A gust of wind picked up another sheet, one of the financial disclosures, and pinned it against the hedge. It flapped there like a warning flag. Damon turned, saw it, and stopped. He realized then, finally, that everything he did had been documented. The cameras, the recordings, the witness statements from neighbors, the paper trail. He was no longer a man bluffing his way through family dinner arguments. He was a defendant. Inside, I lifted the teacup to my lips. The honey had settled at the bottom, warm and heavy. I watched as Damon walked back to his car, slowly now, quieter than I'd ever seen him. He didn't slam the door when he got in. He just sat there, the subpoena in his lap, and stared at the dashboard like it might explain how things had gotten here. But I knew the answer. He'd brought himself to this doorstep. I just happened to be holding the key. The porch light flickered once. The camera lens gleamed like a silent witness. I spoke only to myself, but the words echoed in my chest. I didn't push him into court. He marched there on his own, and the next chapter had just begun. The phone rang just past midnight. I didn't need to check the screen. I knew that tremble, that timing, the silence before the storm returns. Clara. I let it ring twice more. Part of me wanted to wait longer, let her sit with whatever ache had driven her to call so late. But when I finally picked up, her voice cracked before I could even say hello. "Mom?" I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know what I signed. I stayed quiet. I thought. He told me it was just for a parcel. Just a stupid package he needed delivered here. I didn't even read it. I just signed. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Her words tumbled out like water through a broken dam. "You used my address," I said calmly, "for a $250,000 transaction." "I didn't know," she sobbed. "He didn't tell me. He said he'd handle the money." That it was a smart move. I thought he knew what he was doing. He sounded so confident. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window. The garden was still under moonlight. The lavender shimmered faintly like smoke. "He always sounds confident, Clara," I said. "That doesn't make him honest." On the other end, her breath stuttered. "I'm scared, Mom." That hit deeper than I expected. My fingers curled tightly around the armrest. Her voice, so small, so brittle, sounded like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed after a thunderstorm, asking if the world was ending. "He said you're overreacting. That you'll cool down." I didn't respond. A part of me broke hearing her cry. A part of me wanted to tell her I'd fix it all, like I used to with scraped knees and broken hearts. But that part had been burned too many times now. That part had to grow up too. Instead, I said what I knew she needed to hear, even if she wouldn't like it. "Clara, mistakes have consequences, yours included." She fell silent. "I love you," I added. "But love doesn't mean pretending you didn't help forge this mess." You signed," I interrupted gently but firmly, "without reading." "That's yours to carry." I heard her inhale, sharp and shaky. I wanted to believe he was right, that we'd finally get ahead. That line. I had said it too, decades ago. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, time folded back on itself. I was 29. My husband, Alan, had come home late, his tie undone, hands smelling faintly of whiskey and printer ink. He laid out papers on the kitchen table and said it was just temporary, a small loan to get us through a tough season. He kissed my forehead and told me to sign, said he'd handle it. I signed. 3 months later, we were one foreclosure letter away from losing the house my father built. That was the first time I realized love didn't make someone trustworthy. That charm and warmth could mask recklessness. That silence could be a trap. I opened my eyes. "Clara," I said softly, "I've been where you are. I've sat in that same shame, signed without knowing, trusted without proof, and I paid for it." She was crying again, quietly now. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know." A pause. "Will you forgive me?" I didn't answer right away. Forgiveness was never the problem. Accountability was. "I'll always be your mother," I said finally. "But being a mother doesn't mean shielding you from your own reflection." "What do I do?" "You stand up. You face it. You stop letting Damon speak for you. And if you want out of this mess, you start acting like someone who wants to be free." She sniffled. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," I said. "You just haven't had to be." Yet another long silence. "I'm here," I said before hanging up, "but I won't fix this for you." I set the phone down. Outside, the wind picked up. A branch scratched gently against the window pane. I looked out into the night and remembered the day I nearly lost everything. The only reason I didn't was because a lawyer, an old friend of my father's, forced me to put my name on the deed. "For protection," he'd said, "just in case." Back then, I thought it was paranoia. Now I called it wisdom. Funny how experience reframes everything. My gaze drifted toward the locked drawer in the hall cabinet, where that same deed still lived, folded and intact. Next to it, the copy of Clara's promissory note, the paper trail of trust, misplaced. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. But I was wide awake. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not from the air conditioning, but from the quiet. That kind of thick, coiled silence that sits on your shoulders, waiting to pounce. I'd worn gray, no jewelry, hair pulled back, neat. I didn't want drama. I wanted clarity, truth, stripped bare. Across the aisle, Damon sat beside his attorney, a younger man in an overpriced suit who looked like he practiced his smirks in the mirror. Clara was 2 seats behind them. She didn't meet my eyes when I entered. Harold Pierce sat beside me, calm as ever. His worn leather briefcase sat between us, scuffed from years of battles just like this. He leaned over and whispered, "Let them talk first. We'll end it with the facts The bailiff called the room to order. We stood. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s, silver hair sharp against her black robe. She looked like someone who'd raised children, buried parents, and didn't tolerate nonsense. Civil court. Nothing flashy. No jury. Just words, paper, and weight. Damon's attorney opened confidently. "Your Honor, we move for dismissal." This is, quite frankly, a domestic misunderstanding being paraded through legal channels. The note in question was not a formal contract. It was a gesture, a familial agreement between a mother and her daughter, not a binding loan. No interest, no repayment schedule, just sentiment. He smiled, slimy. "Miss, Mitchell is attempting to enforce something that was never meant to be enforced." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you have a copy of the note?" Harold stood. "We do, Your Honor." "And a notarized copy of the deed of trust securing that loan, filed at the time of purchase." The attorney scoffed. Harold didn't blink. He passed the papers to the bailiff, who walked them to the bench. The judge took her time reading them. When she reached the notary stamp, her expression didn't change, but her silence deepened. "This," she said finally, "is indeed a legal document, with real implications. Mr. Harrison, care to adjust your argument?" Damon's lawyer tried to pivot. "Even so, Your Honor, the money was gifted to the daughter, and it was her right to do with it as she pleased, including entrusting it to her husband." "That may be true," the judge said, "but if the asset was encumbered by a secured loan and sold without fulfilling the debt, that is another matter entirely." She looked at Damon. "Did you benefit from the proceeds of the villa's sale?" He cleared his throat. "We invested it. Together. In what?" "Blue Harbor Capital." Harold stood again, this time with a folder. "Your Honor, we are currently working with a licensed private investigator. Blue Harbor Capital does not appear to be a registered firm under the SEC. No traceable filings, no financial records, no registration. At best, it's a shell. At worst, it's a scam." The room stilled. Clara shifted in her seat. Damon's fingers twitched against the table. The judge leaned forward slightly. "And Miss Mitchell's home address was used to secure credit linked to this investment, correct?" Harold nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." Without her consent, the judge sighed. "Then this is no longer simply a family dispute. This borders on financial misconduct." The lawyer tried to object. "There's no proof my client knowingly—" "Save it for trial," the judge said sharply. "This court finds sufficient grounds to proceed." She looked at me. "Miss Mitchell, your claim will be formally considered. Until then, any further financial activity using your property as collateral is prohibited. We'll reconvene in 30 days. Court adjourned." The gavel hit the wood with a satisfying weight. Order. Damon stood so fast his chair nearly fell. Clara rose more slowly. She looked pale, uncertain. Her eyes flickered toward me just for a second, but said nothing. As the room cleared, Harold packed up in practiced silence. "That went well," he said. "It's not over." "No," he agreed, "but now it's official." We walked out into the daylight. The courthouse steps were wide, the kind that make you feel like you're either rising or descending, depending on the day. Clara and Damon stood at the edge of the lot. He was pacing, arms flailing. She was still, watching him. I didn't stop to speak, but as I passed the entrance, I caught the sound of Damon's voice cracking. "She's bluffing. It's just paper." And then Clara, so softly I barely caught it, said, "No, she isn't." Back in my car, I took a deep breath. The scent of lavender oil I kept in the glove box calmed me. A small vial, a smaller ritual. That courtroom hadn't healed anything, but it had drawn a line, and this time I was ready to stand behind it. The call came late afternoon. I was in the garden trimming back the lavender, the scent clinging to my gloves. That quiet, repetitive motion used to bring me peace. That day, it barely held my hand steady. "Mrs. Mitchell," the investigator said, "you might want to sit down." I didn't. He continued anyway. "We found something disturbing. Damon, along with an associate of his, filed a quitclaim deed 6 weeks ago. It's forged. The document falsely transfers future interest in your property to Clara and indirectly to him." My breath caught. "Future interest?" "Yes, ma'am. The deed implies that upon your passing, full title to the house would go to your daughter. It's not legally binding, at least not without your signature, but it was used to secure a loan." My mouth went dry. "He tried to mortgage my house. Worse," the investigator said, "he tried to steal it." Using your name, I walked into the kitchen, set the shears down on the counter. The house suddenly felt different, less like mine, like someone had touched something sacred without permission. I whispered, "How did the bank accept it?" "Small firm. No thorough verification, and the notary used in the filing doesn't exist. It's a fake stamp. Digital forgery. And Clara? She's listed as the grantee. That's what makes it messy." I thanked him, hung up, and stared out the window for a long time. The wind moved through the lavender like a tide, back and forth, like breath, like grief. That evening, Clara showed up. No makeup, eyes swollen, shoulders hunched in on herself like a child waiting to be scolded. I didn't know," she said the moment I opened the door. "You signed something," I said quietly. She nodded. "He said it was just a receipt." "For an overnight delivery." I was half asleep. He rushed me. My voice came out colder than I intended. "You signed a deed, Clara." "Not a package. I didn't see the pages. He only showed me the first one. And I trusted him. I said nothing. Just stood there." She went on. "He told the bank that you were sick, that you wanted to transfer ownership in case something happened. I thought it was just precaution, but it wasn't, was it?" "No," I said. "It wasn't." She sank onto the edge of the porch, covering her face. Her voice was muffled by her palms. "He told me we'd start over, that this was just a formality. I didn't think he'd go this far." I leaned against the doorframe. I could feel the ache in my knees, but also something heavier behind my ribs, a grief I couldn't name. For months, I'd seen her as a stranger, a traitor even. But now, for the first time, I saw her as I once was, naive, cornered, clinging to the wrong man because the truth was too sharp to hold. Back when I was her age, my late husband had done something similar, slipped documents in front of me after long nights, before coffee, before clarity. I'd signed. I almost lost this house once before. It took years of quiet repayment and one cruel foreclosure notice to wake me up. The cycle was trying to repeat itself, but this time I wasn't 28, and I wasn't afraid anymore. "You know this changes everything," I said. Clara nodded. "I'm not protecting him," she whispered. "Not anymore." Her fingers twisted in her lap. "If you press charges, if this goes to criminal court..." "It's fraud," I said. "He forged legal documents. He used my name, my home." Clara's voice was barely audible. "He's going to lose everything." I looked her straight in the eye. "So was I." She flinched, and then she nodded, slowly, as if finally seeing the shape of the fire she'd been standing in. Before she left, she turned at the bottom of the porch steps. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Mom." "I know," I said, "but that doesn't erase it." She walked to her car, shoulders straighter than before. Inside, I pulled out the safe key again, the promissory note, the original deed, the file from Harold. I laid them all on the dining table, one by one, like pieces of a long, quiet war. And then I added a new page to the pile, this one from the investigator, a scanned copy of the forged quitclaim deed. My name, not in my handwriting, a notary stamp that dissolved under digital analysis. I lit a single candle beside the stack, lavender scent, the same one I used the night Clara was born. There are betrayals that scream, and there are those that whisper in ink. This one almost erased me, but almost doesn't count. I blew out the candle. War was coming, but this time I wouldn't be caught sleeping. When Harold called the next morning, his voice was tighter than usual. "You need to come down to the courthouse," he said. "Now. The U.S. Attorney's Office is involved." I paused. "Federal?" "Yes. Blue Harbor isn't just a shady fund. It's a shell, a front for a multi-layered laundering operation, offshore accounts, dummy LLCs, and it seems Damon's signature is on more than a few wires." My hand went cold around the phone. He continued, "And Vera, he used your address as the registered business location on at least 2 filings." I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The truth had become its own language, sharp and merciless. Harold's voice softened. "They've issued a freeze order. Emergency hearing in 30. The courtroom was different that day, no longer the quiet grind of civil procedure. Now it pulsed with something colder. Federal agents in the gallery, a prosecutor in navy blue with eyes like flint. The judge, stone-faced, flipping through a binder as thick as a dictionary. I sat behind Harold. Clara beside me, hands folded so tightly her knuckles went white. Damon, 2 rows ahead, looked smaller, not physically, just deflated, like the thread of confidence he'd always worn so smugly had finally snapped. The prosecutor stood, introduced herself as Assistant U.S. Attorney Lauren Baer. No nonsense. She didn't waste time. "Your Honor, the Department of Justice formally requests a temporary injunction on all real estate and liquid assets under Damon Westfall, due to his participation in an unregistered investment vehicle known as Blue Harbor Capital." She clicked a remote. Screens lit up on either side of the courtroom. "Here," she pointed, "are bank records tracing funds from Clara Westfall's villa sale. Proceeds funneled through 5 accounts, 2 in the Caymans, 1 in Belize, all in names traced back to shell corporations, managed by Mr. Westfall's known associates." Another slide. "This LLC, Silver Strand Holdings, lists Mrs. Vera Mitchell's home address as its point of registration. She has no knowledge of this entity. We believe her home was fraudulently used to legitimize paperwork submitted to regional lenders. That alone constitutes multiple felonies: wire fraud, conspiracy, and elder financial abuse." I didn't move. I couldn't. But inside, something ancient and fiery sparked to life. The judge's gavel struck once. "Freeze order granted," he said. "Effective immediately. Mr. Westfall is barred from accessing or approaching the residence of Mrs. Mitchell until further notice." Damon rose, lips parted in protest. "Your Honor, that's my wife's mother." The judge raised a hand. "You'll speak through your attorney, Mr. Westfall, and if you approach that woman again, I will hold you in contempt." The room went silent. I turned to look at Clara. She hadn't looked at him once. Outside the courthouse, the wind was sharp and dry. It caught the ends of my silver hair, lifted it behind me like a veil. I didn't try to tame it. There are storms you outrun, and there are storms you walk straight into, because finally, you're not afraid to get wet. Across the street, news vans had started to gather. I didn't flinch. The truth had arrived, loud and public. It no longer belonged behind closed doors. I stared straight ahead. My feet were steady, my breath even. This wasn't over, but for the first time in months, I was no longer the one being chased. I was standing still, letting the storm come to me. She showed up just after dusk, hair undone, wearing the same wrinkled sweater from court. Clara stood on my front porch like she used to after piano recitals, nervous, uncertain, holding back tears. "Mom," her voice cracked. "I left the motel. Damon's gone, took my car. I don't even know where he went. But I can't go back there. I can't do this anymore. I opened the door halfway, let the porch light fall across her face. She looked older, not in years, but in weight. A kind of bruised maturity that doesn't show in wrinkles, but in how the shoulders carry regret. "I'll help you," I said softly, "but not by letting you in." She blinked. "What?" "There's a room above Helen's flower shop. It's not big, but it's safe. Month-to-month lease. I'll cover the deposit and first month. After that, it's on you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You're not going to let me stay here?" I stepped outside, gently pulled the door closed behind me. "No, Clara, I can't. You're my daughter, and I love you more than you'll ever know. But this house isn't just walls and wood. It's everything I've survived, and letting you back in now would be like opening the door to everything I've finally stood up to." She didn't speak for a long while, just nodded, barely. We drove in silence. She didn't ask where. When we arrived, the upstairs room still smelled faintly of carnations, a narrow twin bed, a chipped mirror, and a radiator that moaned like an old dog. But it was hers. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't hug her. I just handed her the spare key and turned to leave. "Mom," she called out, "do you really think I can start over?" I paused at the door. "I think you already have." 3 weeks passed before I heard from her again. An envelope arrived one Monday afternoon. Inside, a money order for $100, folded inside a plain white sheet of paper. No note, no explanation, just her handwriting across the top, "Toward the debt." The following week, another arrived, then another. It wasn't the money. God knows I didn't need the money. It was the principle, the intent. Every envelope was a quiet apology, and a small stake driven into the soil of her own life. One evening, my phone buzzed. Clara had texted a photo. It was her small studio. Neat, a second-hand bookshelf, one potted plant on the sill. But it was the hand-painted wooden plaque above her bed that stopped me. "Begin again." She captioned the photo, "This time, I'm not running." I stared at that image for a long time. Let it settle in my chest. Let it burn off the bitterness. Sometimes we think love means pulling someone out of a storm, but I've learned sometimes love means letting them walk through it, alone, because that's how they learn their own strength. I walked out into the yard. Lavender swayed softly under the porch light. I bent down, ran my fingers across the blossoms. There are seasons when silence is love. There are seasons when letting go is grace. And sometimes, the hardest thing a mother can do is to stop rescuing her child, not because she stopped loving them, but because she finally believes they might just be able to love themselves. I stood up, hands stained purple from the flowers, and looked out into the dark. She was still my daughter, still my heart, but now she was also her own, and that, I realized, was the most unexpected healing of all. The courtroom was colder that day, maybe from the weather, maybe from the truths waiting to be said aloud. Damon sat beside his attorney, twitching, jaw clenched. He hadn't glanced at Clara since she entered. She sat across the aisle, alone, pale blue blouse, hair tied back. Her eyes locked onto the judge's bench, unmoving like she'd rehearsed how not to flinch. I was just behind Harold, holding the thick folder of evidence like a shield pressed to my chest. "All rise," the bailiff called. We stood. The judge entered. A woman in her late 50s, silver hair pulled into a bun, black robe flowing like water. Her gaze was sharp enough to slice through Damon's arrogance. "This session is now in order." The attorneys began. Damon's tried again to paint this all as a family misunderstanding, that the promissory note was a gesture, not a contract, that the emails were irrelevant, that the house was never in danger, that I, Vera Mitchell, was being vindictive, emotional, too old to understand modern investment strategies. Harold didn't flinch. He waited until the noise ran dry, then stood with the calm of someone who's held truth in his hands too long to be shaken. "Your Honor," Harold said, "we submit newly retrieved email correspondence between Mr. Damon Everett and representatives of the entity operating under the name Blue Harbor Capital." He passed a printed thread to the court clerk. The judge adjusted her glasses. Harold continued, "In this thread, Mr. Everett not only confirms the use of Miss Mitchell's address as collateral without her consent, but also discusses obtaining and submitting a forged notary seal for a quitclaim deed meant to falsely suggest transfer of future interest in the plaintiff's property." Murmurs rose. The judge slammed her gavel. "Order!" I turned to Clara. Her lips parted slightly, and for the first time I saw it. The crack. The part of her that knew but hadn't let herself believe. Damon stood up suddenly. "This is crap. That email was planted. She's out to destroy me." He pointed directly at me. The judge's gaze narrowed. "Mr. Everett, sit down." He didn't. "I swear, this is a setup. I didn't. She's just bitter because I wouldn't bow down to her little guilt game." "I will hold you in contempt, Mr. Everett," the judge warned. "One more outburst and I will have you escorted from this courtroom." Damon slammed his palm against the table, sending a folder sliding off the edge. Gasps. Whispers. The bailiff stepped forward. The judge lifted her gavel again. "Do I make myself clear?" He sat, breathing heavily, a vein throbbing at his temple. Harold turned slightly and whispered over his shoulder to me, "He's unraveling." I nodded, but my eyes were on Clara. She was trembling. Then she stood. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and steady. "Your Honor, I'd like to request time to speak to the court." Her lawyer leaned in, surprised, but didn't stop her. The judge raised a brow. "Briefly, Miss, Everett." Clara took a shaky breath. "My name is Clara Mitchell Everett. I was married to the defendant for 6 years. I believed in him. I followed his decisions. I signed what he told me to sign. I turned against my own mother to prove my loyalty." She paused, looked at me. I was wrong. Silence. I didn't know about the fake deed. I didn't understand what he was using my signature for. But I do now, and I want the court to know. I'm filing for divorce. Effective immediately. She sat down. Her voice had cracked at the end, but she didn't cry. I didn't move. Couldn't. Across the aisle, Damon's face twisted. Shock, disbelief, then fury. But he said nothing. For the first time, he was truly quiet. The judge nodded. Noted. She looked at Damon, her tone sharper now. "Mr. Everett, you are to remain within court jurisdiction. The evidence submitted today will be reviewed by the district attorney's office for potential criminal proceedings. Until then, you are not to approach Miss Mitchell's residence or any individual listed in this litigation. Do you understand?" He didn't respond. "Mr. Everett?" He nodded once, jaw locked. The gavel came down again. "Court is adjourned." We walked out in silence. Clara stayed behind, probably to sign paperwork. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Not yet. Outside, the clouds were heavy with rain that hadn't decided to fall. I stood at the courthouse steps and watched people move like shadows, some glancing, some pretending not to. I clutched the folder to my chest. Some men rise by intimidation. They believe volume wins truth and fear makes them untouchable. But the louder they scream, the closer they are to losing. Damon Everett was a man who gave orders his whole life. But in the end, he lost to a piece of paper. Not just the email, not the promissory note, but the courage in his wife's divorce filing and the quiet in my hands as I held every lie he thought he could hide. I walked to the sidewalk. Wind rustled the leaves above. Behind me, the courthouse doors slammed shut, and for the first time in a long while, I felt peace inch a little closer. The final day in court came wrapped in silence. No shouting, no gavel slamming, no more performances, Just the quiet before something ends. I sat still as the judge's voice echoed across the courtroom. In light of the verified forged documents, improper use of the plaintiff's residential address, and financial deceit carried out through an unlicensed entity. She paused, her eyes moving deliberately from Damon to Clara. This court orders Mr. Damon Everett and Ms. Clara Everett to repay the outstanding debt of $72,000 to Ms. Vera Mitchell. Furthermore, the forged deed and associated loan filings will be referred to federal prosecutors for criminal investigation. My heart didn't race. It just settled. There were no cheers, no gasps, just the sound of justice landing where it belonged. Damon didn't even flinch. His face was stone, vacant almost, like a man realizing there's no more room left to run. Clara, for once, looked steady. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I would also like to confirm for the record," she said, "that I have officially filed for divorce." That sentence landed heavier than the verdict itself. Even Damon blinked, but she didn't look at him, not even once. When the judge adjourned, I didn't stand up right away. I let the crowd shift, around me, filing out like ghosts. The lawyer beside me patted my hand gently, but I didn't speak. I needed a minute, maybe more. Eventually, I found myself outside on the courthouse steps again, same place as before. This time, the wind was still. A strange quiet hung in the air like a curtain. I sat on the iron bench just outside the front doors, setting my purse down beside me. My hands rested on my lap, no longer clenched. Clara walked past me with her lawyer, then paused. She turned. "I'll send the first payment next week," she said, voice low. "I'll keep my word." I gave a soft nod. "You're learning." She swallowed. "I hope so." Then she walked away. Not to Damon, not toward the parking lot he used. She went in the opposite direction. That mattered. I leaned back against the bench and looked up. For a long moment, I just breathed. It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about being told I was too old to protect what I built, that I wouldn't notice when the ground beneath me was being stolen one paper at a time. Damon thought he could use my daughter as a shield, but he forgot. Mothers don't go blind. We just wait, and when we rise quietly. My eyes followed a bird gliding across the sky, free, unbothered. Behind me, the courthouse doors opened and closed again, but I stayed seated, not tired, just finally unburdened. They said Damon didn't say a word when the federal agents came for him. He was in a gym parking lot, they told me, still wearing that branded polo shirt he liked so much, the one with the golden-stitched logo meant to impress. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He just froze. Now he faces multiple charges: fraud, forgery, conspiracy to defraud financial institutions. His name isn't just mud in our neighborhood anymore. It's inked in official court records. He'll likely spend time behind bars, and that will be his own quiet room to reflect. As for Clara, she moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment above a bookstore. She found work at a local animal shelter, cleaning cages, answering phones, eventually learning how to manage their intake system. She sends me $100 every Friday, like clockwork, sometimes with a note, sometimes not. I don't ask for anything else. I did change the locks, and I added motion sensor lights along the back fence. Some might say it's excessive, but it helps me sleep better. That first evening after the trial, I walked through the house, room by room, touching the furniture, the walls, making peace with the echo of it all. I brewed tea, jasmine, and sat by the window overlooking the lavender bed. The lights flicked on in the garden as the wind stirred the purple stalks. I watched the night move around me, soft, unhurried. I didn't feel alone. I felt held. I used to fear silence. It reminded me of absence, of abandonment. But now, I realize silence is a room where new things begin. It's where roots settle deeper without asking permission. The quiet of this house no longer feels like punishment. It's a sanctuary. And those soft nights, they are not empty. They're just pauses between one life and the next. In the following weeks, I replaced the worn curtains in the kitchen, replanted the east garden bed, hung a small chime above the front door that sang only when the breeze was just right. I didn't tell anyone. I just lived, one breath at a time, one morning at a time. Clara sometimes called, her voice thinner than before, but more honest. We didn't talk about the villa, or the trial, or Damon. We talked about the kittens at her shelter, the stubborn geranium in her window box. We were learning to speak again, in smaller words, in slower truths. And I was learning to live alone, but never lonely, because loneliness is the absence of meaning, and I had plenty of that now. The envelope came on a Wednesday, not a check, not this time. Inside was a crisp stack of $20 bills, 5 neatly counted, a total of 100, and a folded photo printed from a phone, still smelling faintly of lavender lotion. Clara stood in a small room, her hands clasped in front of her like she was still unsure if she belonged. Behind her, a single wooden shelf held a few potted plants. A pale quilt was tucked over a modest bed, and above the desk, nailed slightly crooked on the whitewashed wall, was a wooden sign, "Begin again." She'd written a note on the back of the photo, just 5 words. It's not much, but it's mine. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. The sunlight shifted slowly across the floor, brushing over the edges of the picture like a blessing. The photo didn't show much. No granite countertops, no ocean view, no shining appliances, but it showed something more valuable. Her spine, straight, unbent, and in her eyes, something I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. Clarity. There's a kind of pain that only mothers know. It's not the pain of labor. It's the ache of watching your child fall when you've spent your whole life breaking your own back just to keep them upright. But I've learned, sometimes the fall is necessary. Sometimes they have to touch bottom before they look up and find their own way out. Clara never begged me to forgive her. She never tried to explain Damon's actions again. Instead, she acted. She found a job. She rented a place she could afford. And every Friday, she sent me $100, just like that. It wasn't about the money. It was about the message. I know what I owe you. I know how I failed. Let me begin again. And week by week, dollar by dollar, she wasn't just repaying a debt. She was rebuilding trust. One morning, I walked out to the mailbox barefoot. The air was cool, the porch damp with dew. Another envelope. This time with a Polaroid tucked inside, Clara smiling in her animal shelter apron, holding a black kitten with a missing ear. She'd named him Lucky. There was no note this time, just the image, just her face. And that was enough. I taped the Begin Again photo to the inside of my pantry door, not because I needed to see it every day, but because I wanted it close, quiet, present. It was a reminder. Redemption doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it comes in tired hands washing shelter cages, in late-night texts that say, "Made it home safe." Sometimes it arrives folded into a $100 bill and a whispered prayer. I never needed Clara to repay me in full. What I needed was to know she remembered who she was before the noise, before Damon, before the fog. I didn't raise a girl to kneel to fear. I raised her to stand tall in the wind. And now, finally, she was learning how there's a small plant on my windowsill now, sent by Clara on Mother's Day. She called it Lavender's Cousin, though the tag just said Russian Sage. It blooms soft, persistent, even in dry soil, like her, like me. We don't talk every day, but we're not walking on eggshells anymore. We're walking on something stronger, something earned, and I no longer carry the weight of trying to save her. I just walk beside her, quietly. The news broke on a Thursday morning. I was in the kitchen, boiling water for tea. The kettle hadn't even whistled yet when my phone buzzed on the counter. Harold's name lit the screen. I answered on the second ring. "It's done," he said. "Blue Harbor's finished." Just 2 words, but they landed like a thunderclap. Finished. The investment fund that swallowed my daughter's villa and nearly stole my home had finally been exposed for what it was: a front, a fraud, an elaborate Ponzi scheme tied to 6 shell companies across 3 states, laundering money through future property shares, including mine. Later that morning, I sat by the window with a fresh cup of Earl Grey, the steam curling in slow spirals. The local news anchor appeared on screen. Breaking. Federal authorities have dismantled the infamous Blue Harbor Capital. Charges include wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and money laundering. Among the indicted, Damon Blake, a local business consultant who allegedly used his mother-in-law's address to secure fraudulent loans. There was a photo, Damon being led out in cuffs, head low, lips pressed into a tight, defeated line. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not the man who stormed my porch, not the smooth-talking husband who once called me Mom while reaching for my best bottle of wine. Just a man caught. I didn't feel triumph, not the kind they show in movies. I felt relief. Relief that the web had unraveled, that the lies had stopped tightening around my neck, that finally, justice wasn't something whispered in kitchen corners. It had a face, a headline, and most of all, a weight. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ache anymore, just the soft tick of the clock, the whisper of wind against the window. I sipped my tea slowly, watching the light stretch across the hardwood floor. Sunrise filtered through the lace curtain, and for a moment it felt like the house exhaled. So did I. I didn't call Clara right away. She'd already heard. Instead, she texted later that afternoon. "I saw the news." "I can breathe again," I replied. "Me too." No exclamation points, no lectures, no guilt, just truth. In the end, it wasn't the courtroom that gave me peace. It wasn't the headlines. It was the quiet. The quiet of a house no longer under siege. The quiet of knowing I'd held the line. And it held. That evening, I pulled the lavender blanket tighter over my lap. A breeze stirred the hem of the curtain. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. A child laughed. Life, small and ordinary, continued. And I let it. The breeze was soft that day, brushing through the screen door like an old friend. She stood there a moment before stepping out onto the porch, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her cardigan, eyes lowered, but no longer full of shame. She didn't ask to come in. She didn't bring apologies wrapped in ribbons, just herself, and that was enough. I brought out 2 glasses of lemonade. We sat quietly side by side on the creaking wooden bench that had known more stories than most people ever would. The lavender garden in front of us had bloomed again, not loud, not flashy, just steady. Purple spikes rising through sun-warmed soil, a little taller than last year. "You didn't dig them up," Clara said softly. I smiled. They know how to start over. She nodded. Her eyes shimmered but held strong. We talked about simple things. The new job she'd started at the bookstore near the train station, the neighbor's dog that wouldn't stop chasing squirrels, the way the lavender had crept into the hydrangeas again. She showed me a photo on her phone, her apartment's kitchen, tiny but neat. On the wall above the stove, a wooden plaque, "Begin again." I looked at her, really looked. Her shoulders had straightened. The heaviness in her jaw had eased. The girl I raised was in there, not unchanged, but not lost either. I used to think being strong meant never breaking, but sometimes strength means knowing when to break and choosing how to rebuild. I reached over and placed my hand gently over hers. She didn't pull away. We sat like that for a long time. There was no need to rehash the past, not today. Some wounds don't need words. They need time, space, and presence. And silence. The kind of silence that feels full, not empty. The sun lowered behind the oak tree, casting golden light across the garden. A few bees hovered lazily above the lavender. It smelled like peace, like endings that weren't final, like beginnings dressed in quiet clothes. I've spent my life being the foundation, solid, quiet, taken for granted. But even foundations have the right to pull out rotted bricks, to clear the cracks, to rebuild. Clara stood eventually, brushing crumbs from her jeans. "Can I come by again next week?" she asked. I didn't rush to answer. I wanted her to feel the weight of choice. Then I nodded. "You know where the gate is." She smiled. Not the broken smile from months ago. A real one. Small, but real. She walked down the path, past the bird bath, through the gate she used to race through as a child, and she didn't look back. That, too, was healing. I sat for a while longer, just me and the garden. A bird landed on the railing. Somewhere in the distance, wind chimes stirred. And then I spoke to you, my dear listener, because some stories aren't meant to be kept. They're meant to be passed on. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with me today, wherever you are. I hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.